you'd really think that a lie is fragile.
Right.
Like you'd assume that if you just hold up a solid, undeniable piece of physical reality right in front of someone, a baseless digital rumor would just shatter.
I mean, in a rational world, yes, absolutely.
But back in 2018, there were these two young researchers who found out a really terrifying truth about that.
Yeah, they really did.
They were literally holding up their real identification, standing in broad daylight, surrounded by a huge crowd of people, and they found out that sometimes the physical evidence loses,
It loses completely.
and the digital ghost story wins.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
So today we are doing a deep dive into this stark reality of what happens when a community's collective fear just, completely overrides what is standing right in front of them.
It's a heavy one today.
It is. We're drawing from this really comprehensive article by Rahul Karmakar, and it details this major judicial decision that's become known as the Nagaon verdict. And my goal for today's deep dive, because this is a really dense legal and social tragedy, it's got tricky geography, courtroom jargon, complex mob dynamic.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly layered.
Right. So the mission today is to break all of that down so it is completely easy to understand for you listening at home. We're going to make sense of this.
And, just to give a high-level summary right up front, it's been almost 8 years since the horrific mob lynching of these two youths in Assam's Karbi Anglong district.
Almost 8 years. Wow.
Yeah, and a court has finally handed down a verdict. We're looking at 20 people convicted and 25 people acquitted.
Okay, so to really understand the weight of that legal verdict all those years later, we have to start by looking backward.
Definitely. You really have to start with the jarring contrast of that initial setting.
Right, because what the victims were actually doing that day compared to what the mob thought they were doing, it's just night and day.
It is. So you have these two young men, Abhijit Nath and Nilat Paldas.
And they had traveled from Guwahati. Right.
Exactly. They traveled from Guwahati into the Karbi Anglong district. Specifically, they were visiting the Kangchalamshu waterfalls.
And they weren't there for anything nefarious.
No, not at all. They weren't there to start trouble or, engage with the locals in any kind of aggressive way. The sole purpose of their trip was an environmental study.
They were just documenting nature.
Right. So visually, just picture this. You have two guys with academic intentions, likely carrying notebooks, maybe cameras.
Probably just like researchers.
Exactly. And they're surrounded by this really serene, remote, natural environment.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because if you're just on a harmless scientific field trip,
Yeah.
how do you suddenly step into what feels like a completely alternate reality?
It's almost impossible to process.
It is. Because they didn't just, stumble into a misunderstanding with one or two hostile locals.
No, the scale of it is what's so shocking.
Right. When they reached Pejuri Kachari Tinali, and that falls under the Dokmoka police station, they were suddenly surrounded by a mob of 150 to 200 people. Yeah, 200 enraged people.
So you have two environmental researchers on one side and 200 angry people on the other.
It's terrifying just to imagine.
And I have to push back on this a little, because a crowd of that size, it doesn't just spontaneously generate out of nowhere over, like, a minor local grievance.
No, absolutely not.
There has to be some massive unifying trigger to get 200 people out in the street like that.
Right, and there was a trigger, but what's fascinating here is that the trigger was completely invisible to Abhijit and Nilat Paul.
Invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The prosecution's findings point entirely to a digital catalyst.
Oh, wow.
At the exact time these two men were conducting their environmental study, there was this very specific, highly targeted rumor burning through local social media.
Let me guess. WhatsApp groups, messaging platforms.
Exactly. And the rumor claimed that, quote, child lifters were operating in the area, meaning people kidnapping children.
Oh, man. That specific phrase, child lifters, that is incredibly potent.
It really is.
Because it's not a rumor about, I don't know, a stolen car or petty theft. No, it's much deeper.
It's designed to completely bypass every single logical filter a person has. It taps right into the most primal protective anxiety that any community shares.
It's a textbook example of how to weaponize collective fear. I mean, when you look at the mechanics of how these rumors spread.
Especially in those closed messaging apps.
Right, where the warnings are coming from your friends, your family, your neighbors.
So the information arrives pre-validated.
Exactly. You aren't questioning the source because the source is someone you implicitly trust.
The algorithm of human panic just takes over.
Yes. So this rumor had already pre-written a script for this village.
Wow.
When Abhijit and Yalotpal arrived, these two outsiders from the city, the mob didn't see human beings conducting a study.
They saw the monsters from the story.
Exactly. They saw the avatars of the threat they had just been reading about on their phones.
The digital narrative completely overwrote their physical reality.
It did.
And that brings us to, honestly, the most harrowing part of this entire event. Because when the mob descended, Abhijit and Nilotpal did exactly what anyone would naturally do to try and break a misunderstanding.
Right. They tried to explain.
They tried to present the truth, they stated their names, they explained they were from Guwahati, and they explained why they were at the waterfalls.
Which is the logical thing to do.
The source material explicitly notes that they'd pleaded for their lives in public view. They were offering up their real identities to counter the digital lie.
And, in any normal, rational situation, presenting an ID or clearly stating your verifiable purpose that acts as an anchor,
It breaks the tension.
it should.
Yeah.
But here you run into the psychology of de-individuation within a mob.
De-individuation.
Yeah. When you have 200 people acting together under the umbrella of a perceived moral imperative.
Like protecting their children.
Right. Individual morality and critical thinking, they just get subsumed by the group.
The crowd effectively acts as a single organism.
Exactly. An organism powered entirely by confirmation bias.
So they were so consumed by the fear that the rumor generated, they completely dismissed the physical human pleas right in front of them.
They did. And the tragic outcome was that both men were beaten to death.
It's just devastating. And the dark irony here, well, is that the phones didn't just deliver the rumor that started the violence.
Yeah, they didn't.
The very same devices that spread the lie were actually out in people's hands, recording the assault while it was happening.
Yeah, videos of this horrific incident were captured and then posted right back onto those exact same social media platforms.
It creates this really chilling duality, doesn't it?
It really does. The digital lens functioned as both the weapon and the primary witness.
Wow.
Because on one hand, you have this unregulated network that manufactured a deadly crisis out of thin air with lightning speed.
But on the other hand,
Those videos became the unblinking eye. They captured irrefutable evidence of a crime taking place in a very remote area.
meaning the crime couldn't just be swept under the rug.
Exactly. It made it impossible for the event to just fade away as an unsolved tragedy.
And those videos, they were the catalyst for a massive secondary reaction, right?
Yes.
Reaction.
Once that footage hit the broader public, it sparked widespread outrage. Back in Guwahati, you had people staging silent protests, holding up pictures of the victims, and loudly demanding that the justice system act.
The video effectively forced the authorities' hands. You just can't ignore a murder that's been broadcast to the entire region.
Okay, so since we've established the irrefutable video evidence and the massive scale of the mob, that demand for justice initiates a transition. We go from this chaotic, violently fast event to the meticulous, excruciatingly slow mechanics of the legal system.
Very slow. We're talking almost 8 years later.
Fast forward to Monday's ruling. This is Judge D. Mahanta at the District and Sessions Court in central Assam's Nagaon.
And you really have to think about the logistics of this trial to understand why it took nearly a decade.
Right, because they didn't just arrest one or two people. No. They arrested 45 individuals based on that video evidence and the investigation.
45 defendants in a single case.
Yeah, just the sheer administrative weight of trying 45 people simultaneously is staggering.
I can't even imagine coordinating the legal representation for that many people.
Exactly. You've got dozens of defense attorneys. You have to cross-examine a massive number of witnesses.
And the investigators, they'd have to go through all that grainy, chaotic, mobile phone footage frame by frame.
Frame by agonizing frame. Trying to identify individuals, trying to piece together their specific actions within a swirling crowd.
Because the legal system is designed to be deliberative. It's not designed to be fast.
No, it requires a meticulous chain of custody. It requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt for every single person standing in that courtroom.
Which makes this final verdict a real masterclass in how the law attempts to organize chaos.
It really is.
So the judge evaluated all of that evidence and delivered a split decision. Out of the 45 accused, 20 people were found guilty and 25 people were acquitted.
Let's start with the 20 convictions.
Okay, so what does this all mean for them?
Mm-hmm.
The court found them guilty of murder under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code.
But critically, that was read with Section 149.
Right. Section 149, which deals with something called common object.
Yes.
And they also threw in charges for unlawful assembly, rioting, and assault on public servants.
But Section 149, that is the absolute center of gravity for this verdict. Okay, wait, let me try to map this out to make sure it's completely easy for everyone listening to understand.
Sure, go ahead.
Is common object essentially the legal system's version of a really dark group project?
A dark group project.
Yeah, meaning, like, if a group of people all share the exact same objective, every single person gets the exact same grade, regardless of who did the most work or who actually wrote the final paragraph.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, that is a highly accurate way to look at it.
Okay.
Think about the reality of the video footage the judge had to review.
Right, it's chaos. It's a massive, chaotic blur of 200 people. Limbs are flying, weapons are moving.
So if the law required the prosecution to prove exactly whose specific strike caused the fatal injury,
The defense would win instantly.
because you just can't see it clearly in that.
Exactly. Every defense attorney would simply stand up and say, Your Honor, the video is too chaotic. You cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that my client delivered the final blow.
Wow. If the legal system operated that way, a mob would essentially function as a giant loophole for murder.
You could just hide in the crowd.
You could hide in the crowd and nobody would be accountable.
And that is exactly why Section 149 exists.
Okay.
It creates a framework for collective accountability. It states that if you willingly participate in an unlawful assembly, and that assembly clearly has the shared, understood goal,
The common object.
right, the common object of committing murder, then you are legally held responsible for that murder.
So the court doesn't have to prove your physical action ended a life.
No, they just have to prove you were an active participant in a group that shared that deadly goal.
You shared the objective, you take the full penalty.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. It bridges the gap between the total madness of a riot and the strict precision required by a judge.
It does.
So the prosecution proved that those 20 men were actively engaged in an unlawful assembly with a deadly purpose, and that secured the murder convictions.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because this brings up a massive point of friction. If the law allows a mob to be judged by its shared goal, and there's video evidence of the crowd,
Yeah.
how do 25 people just walk away?
That is the big question.
Why were more than half of the accused acquitted, and the court directed the superintendent of the Nagaon Central Jail to just release them?
Well, this raises an important question about how courts define participation. We hit this hard wall between presence and participation in a court of law. It can be incredibly frustrating to observe, especially in a case like this, but it's a foundational part of how the justice system operates.
Meaning what, exactly?
The 25 people who were acquitted, they weren't necessarily found to be entirely innocent of just being there.
They were at the scene.
Right, but they were facing specific charges, including things like mischief and abetment.
And abetment meaning they were actively encouraging or assisting the crime.
Right, but in a courtroom, you cannot convict someone of abetment just because they are visible in the background of a chaotic video.
Oh.
You have to prove, with hard evidence, that their specific actions materially encouraged or assisted the violence.
So you have to prove they weren't just a bystander swept up in the crowd.
Yes, or someone who arrived late or someone who was just standing there watching.
The judge ruled that the prosecution's evidence against these 25 individuals simply did not meet that strict threshold.
Exactly. It wasn't enough to legally bind them to the crimes. There was reasonable doubt regarding their active participation.
So, because the evidence against them wasn't rock solid, the system defaults to letting them go rather than risking an unfounded conviction.
That's the way the system is designed to work.
But you can imagine how that lands with the families of Abhijit and Nilatpal.
Oh, it has to be agonizing.
You look at 20 murder convictions, and on paper, that looks like the justice system working. It looks like a massive victory.
It does.
But the source material makes it very clear the kin of the slain youths are actively dissatisfied with this verdict.
And you really have to look at it from their perspective to understand why.
Yeah.
I mean, from a purely administrative standpoint, convicting 20 people from a mob is a major judicial feat.
It's huge.
But for a grieving family, justice isn't just a statistical victory.
Yeah.
When you know that a massive crowd of 200 people participated in the death of your loved ones,
Right.
and you watch 25 people who were investigated who stood trial for it, just walk out of the courtroom free.
It doesn't feel like a resolution at all.
No, it feels like the system failed to capture the full scope of the crime.
It feels like an unfinished fight.
Exactly.
And the families, they aren't just accepting this split decision. They are actively looking at their next steps
Right. The article notes they haven't ruled out approaching the Guwahati High Court.
to challenge the acquittals,
Yeah, they want to appeal the decision that let those 25 individuals go.
which means this legal saga, which has already consumed 8 years of their lives, is far from over.
The appeals process is so complex, and it will require even more time to relitigate all that evidence.
But while the families consider their appeal, the clock is still ticking for the 20 people who were convicted.
It is. The court has scheduled their sentencing for April 24,
Okay.
and that will be the specific moment when Judge Mahanta dictates the exact penalty they'll face for their role in the mob.
Deciding how many years of their lives will be forfeited for what happened that day at the waterfall.
Right.
So to sum this up, for you listening, this has been a really heavy journey from start to finish.
Yeah, it really has.
We looked at an academic trip to study nature that ended up colliding with the most destructive impulses of community. And all of it was fueled entirely by a baseless digital rumor.
A rumor that just moved so fast.
We saw how a crowd of hundreds ignored real, human-pleased physical evidence right in front of them because they were blinded by a collective fear engineered on a screen.
It's terrifying.
And we traced how the justice system eventually tried to untangle that chaos, using legal concepts like collective accountability to secure 20 murder convictions, while a strict demand for hard evidence led to 25 acquittals.
Leaving the victims' families still fighting for total closure nearly a decade later.
Exactly.
And, when you step back and look at the entire timeline of this tragedy, from the peaceful incident at the waterfall to the courtroom in Nagajon, you're left with a really unsettling contrast.
What's that?
Well, you see a completely baseless digital rumor spread through a community fast enough to end 2 lives in a matter of hours.
Oh.
Right. But then you look at the justice system, which took almost 8 years, staggering under the weight of meticulous logistics and evidentiary rules, just to secure a partial resolution.
Wow. Yeah.
It forces you to wonder, in a modern era where algorithms and closed networks can weaponize misinformation at lightning speed, how can our slow, deliberate mechanisms of justice ever hope to catch up?
That's a great point.
Because by the time the truth finally pieces together its case in a courtroom, the lie has already burned the house down.